My name is Chris Salem. I'm a business acceleration strategist and a professional speaker, and I am here on Azure Radio.
Good afternoon, Christopher. How are you?
I am doing great. It is a pleasure to be here.
I am so glad to have you. I met you in the 413. Shout out to Steve Malachevsky and all the amazing people over there. It's so funny because Chris is like, look, I don't even come on Clubhouse like that. I'm here for the 413. That's it. Otherwise, you got to email me.
Yeah, it is such a great group. I wouldn't have met you if I not we've been in that group together, and just so much wisdom and so much just people sharing from their experiences and from the heart. It's just such a blessing that we have that group each and every morning when we wake up.
Absolutely. So, how did you originally get connected with the 413?
Well, how I got connected with the 413 was early on when Clubhouse had started. My business kind of was in transition where I was going in person now more to virtual. So there was like a little bit of a little hiccup there, and everything was still fine. But at that point, I was introduced to Clubhouse, and I had started a group there called Speaking from Influence, and I used to run a Clubhouse room there, and one of the people that would come in regularly was Stephen, and Stephen would come in and contribute. And this was before he started the 413, and he would come in, contribute, and then he invited me to a men's group that he used to hold on Zoom, usually on a Saturday morning at, I think it was 5:30 Pacific Standard Time, 8:30 Eastern Time, where I'm on. And from there, it kind of led into the 413. So I was involved with the 413 since the beginning. And then through the involvement of the 413 since then, I've been involved, pretty much the whole time. I'm not on all the time, but I've gotten to see the changes and shifts in people from the people that were there from the beginning, guys like Dave Mattingly and so on, yourself and other people, and here we are, and it's just been a great ride.
Yes, so you are a professional speaker. I know I asked you in the room, but tell me about your very first speaking gig. What was that experience like?
Wow. Well, I mean, this goes back many years ago. I would say that the first time I spoke publicly was back about 30 years ago. I was in Toastmasters at the time, and I remember I had to deliver my first talk. And at the time, it was geared around towards just something about myself and how I help people. It was a table topic, type thing. That's what they call it in Toastmasters, table topics. And at that point, I had to learn how to speak for that short period of time with no ums and ahs, which most people when they talk, they're like that type of thing. And while I did well, it was a little nervous. Like I felt like, what are people going to think of me? At that point, I wasn't really secure with myself at that point, and I was kind of like, did I do it right? I was starting to second guess myself, but I realized I didn't say as many ums and ahs like I thought I would. As a matter of fact, people were like, wow, you said very few, which was very encouraging. But it was from that experience that I felt like, speaking isn't, it's in my blood, and it's only going to get better from here. And sure enough, within 6 years, 6.5 years later, I was speaking at my first industry event, and that's what it's been like for the last 20 plus years.
That's amazing. So, what are some of the major obstacles that you've had to overcome
Well,
before
some of the
becoming?
major obstacles that I had to overcome was myself, my own self-limiting beliefs. I grew up, as a man that didn't have a lot of direction. I grew up with a father that was not usually around, and when he was emotionally checked out. I grew up in a codependent home. I struggled with 12 years of addiction to escape the way I felt about myself and my own self-limiting beliefs. I'm a recovering passive aggressive in terms of my behavior and communication. I am a person that really didn't understand who he was, and I really had to come full circle to learn how to operate in the moment rather in the past and the future where fear thrives from those limiting beliefs, and had to learn how to shed my strong need for validation in order to now only not be consumed even with validating myself, but to just be who I was, all the good things, the bad things, the flaws, and just put it out there. And as I worked on myself for all these years, it just allowed me to really develop my confidence to a high level, not one from ego, but from a place of who I really am, feeling proud of who I am with all those flaws and good things and bad things and all the bad experiences and the good experiences, to now be an example and be a resource as a trusted advisor. And this is how I show up each and every day as a business acceleration strategist, an executive coach, professional speaker, as a dad, as a husband, as a member of my community, whatever the case may be.
Awesome sauce. And global professional speaker, Christopher Salem is my guest here on the Azure Radio. So what was that moment that led you to recovery?
That's a great question, Denia, it's a powerful one. As I mentioned earlier, I didn't really have a strong relationship with my father, but at the time around when I started this transformation, my father was diagnosed with lung cancer. He was age 56 at the time, and that's the age that I'm turning in 2 months. I will be 56 years old, the same age that my dad was when he passed away. And at the time, I didn't know what I didn't know anything about self-limiting beliefs. I didn't even know what the problem was. But I look back that my dad was just a product of his own environment. He was neglected as a child, and he was the black sheep of the family. And he had his own self-limiting beliefs. And as a result of that, he was just passing down all he knew. It wasn't like he chose to alienate me and my brother. He didn't know how to, because his dad didn't do that for him. He was simply repeating all he knew. Now, I didn't know this at the time. I can only say this in hindsight. But the event that took place that was the catalyst for this change was a day and a half before my dad passed on. I remember being in the room with him, and I was holding his hand, and he looked over at me. He couldn't talk. He was like he was sedated, just allowed him to die peacefully because of the pain. And he couldn't talk, but I remember him looking at me, and it was like he was speaking to me. I can't explain I understood what he was saying, but there was no words spoken. Some people will say, "Oh, come on," but I'm telling you, I knew what he was saying. And because of this, the hairs on my arm went up, and he basically said, "I just wanted to let you know that I've always loved you and your brother. I just didn't know how to show it. And I even loved your mother, and I know I wasn't a good husband." And just I'm not going to go into all the details, but nonetheless, it made me realize that he was a product of his own environment, and that was when the light bulb went off and said, no matter what has happened in our lives, even things that are beyond our control, they can even be horrific things, traumatic things. You didn't ask for it, but it happened for a reason. It's happening for you, not to you. That you are always responsible for what you do with that moving forward with your life. I was the victim. I was the one who came up with excuses. I pointed the finger at other people. I dumped my anger onto other people. I struggled with addiction to escape it. That was the first time that I rose up to say, I'm going to take responsibility. I didn't know how. I didn't know how I was going to do it. But that was the eye-opening event that did it. And when my father passed, it felt like there was some kind of weight that was released from within me. And I've never looked back since. And that changed my life. It changed my career. And I look at it, it was a blessing. I had an opportunity, in a sad moment of my father passing, that he ended up passing along the greatest gift that I could have ever asked for a father. Because for all the years that I was seeking his validation, that it was all addressed right there in that moment.
That's so beautiful. A lot of people don't understand that you can come back from a really, really hard time. You just have to believe in yourself and put the work in. And you definitely have done both. And now you're encouraging others to do the same.
Yeah.
It's I wanted to just not just do the basic the foo questions because I was like, no, let me actually ask because you mentioned it, but you skipped over it. So I was like, wait, let me ask real quick because that is what makes people understand the power of forgiveness, the power of giving back, the power of loving yourself and making that choice to love yourself so that you can love someone else.
Correct. Yeah. I mean, at this place, I was always seeking this validation and love from outside of me. And I realized it's got to start from within you. You have to learn to love yourself. No one can love you enough to that you're going to feel good and be happy. You have to do that for yourself. And it took me 30, almost 31 years at that point to figure it out. But I can say that the last 24, 25 years now have been, a completely different life. Well, it took me, about 5 years to really evolve from that. But, once living this in that consistency through discipline and making these changes and be the example and being a resource of it every day, it's changed my life. And I'm committed. I committed the rest of my life to sharing this. And I do this in many different ways, either on a personal level, professional level, in business. But it always comes back down to that foundation.
I love it. I love it. And global professional speaker Christopher Salem is my guest here on Denia Azure Radio. So, you've done speaking gigs all across the world. What has been one of your craziest experiences on stage?
Wow. Well, there's been a lot, but let me give you one that happened many years ago. And this was pretty because as speakers, we occasionally are going to get heckled, like just like a comedian gets heckled. And a professional speaker will know how to deflect it and move forward without missing a beat. Now, this was still early on in my career. This was back in 2004. I believe it was 2004. It might have been 2003, 2004. I can't remember the exact year, but it was around that time frame. And I remember I was speaking at a large AA conference meeting at St. Patrick's Cathedral
Mm.
Church in Manhattan. So everyone, if you're familiar with Manhattan or St. Patrick's, it's a famous church in Manhattan. A lot of big
Mhm.
celebrities have gotten married there and so on. And there was an AA annual, like a conference meeting there where there was about 400 people in this big room at the church that they had downstairs. And I was asked to speak. And they started asking, the part of my talk was what was the root cause to my addiction? And then, people were going to say, oh, it was alcohol or it was drugs, it was sex, it was gambling or whatever. And when I opened up and said, it was none of the above. Those were just the choices that we made to mask the problem. You either go to alcohol, you drugs, sex, gambling, food, whatever. The real root cause to my addiction was my limiting beliefs, that strong need for validation. It was anger that I experienced, and I was addicted to anger, the emotion in reaction to my limiting beliefs. Now, when I said that, and said that it didn't matter if I was drinking or if I had a sexual addiction or if I had, it didn't matter. It rubbed some people the wrong way. And there was one man in particular who had a thick Russian accent that blurted out, stop talking like that and you're full of crap, and told me to go F myself, so to speak, in front of everyone. And I basically stopped, paused, and said, I can understand where you're coming from, sir. I've been there. And I know what it feels like to think that we're sober when we're sober from the substance, but we're not sober in our minds. I'd love to talk with you later and we can chat more about it. And I went right back to my talk. He stormed out of the and slammed the door, didn't miss a beat. Lo and behold, 2 weeks later, I got a phone call. Didn't know where it was coming from. We didn't have caller ID at that time, or maybe yeah, I didn't have it on the phone I had, and I recognized that thick Russian accent. I said, "Oh my gosh, is that the guy that told me to go? You know what?" And he called to apologize and said that I had triggered something with him. He had been sober for 8 years from alcohol, and yet he was traded one addiction for another and didn't realize what he was doing was really still part of his addiction. He was cheating on his wife. He had a sexual addiction. He was frequenting prostitutes and escorts and going into just putting himself into really dangerous situations with people that to escape in place of the alcohol. And he realized he wasn't sober like he thought he was, and let alone he was a psychologist to boot. So here he was helping people with their problems, and he had his own. He was very transparent. He ended up becoming a good friend of mine, and to this day we are friends. And he thanked me because if it wasn't for what I had shared, it may have not moved him to think that he was really sober, and it saved his marriage.
Wow, that is powerful. And I love the fact that instead of like just getting mad, you said, you know what? I understand you. I've been there. You will get through this. And now you guys are friends. That is such a beautiful story. And a global professional speaker. Christopher Salem is my guest here on Denia Azure Radio. So, out of all of the events that you have done, what has been your favorite to speak at so far?
Well, I mean, there have been many, many events that I enjoyed. I've spoke for many companies. I've spoke for many industry events. But I would always say that I enjoy the events that are not always going to just be business related. These can be ones that address, people that are struggling, that are, have a strong requirement to make a change. I can remember talking at certain, on the behalf of our nonprofit, Empowered Fathers in Action, at certain family crisis conferences where you might have, there could be foster children, there could be families in distress, single moms with kids and barely making ends meet, and speaking wisdom, like kind of like what you talk about, Alex. Speak wisdom into others, and what you shared before. And it really, when you see someone moved by that, when they're crying, not because crying, but a good cry, like you help them to see something, that there is hope, there is a light at the end of the tunnel, that people do care and can relate and understand, and that you're not alone. You just have to ask for help, and then to help yourself. Those are the events that always stand out when I touch somebody emotionally to move them forward. I remember doing that in a company. I talked to an aerospace company where this woman was a great asset to the company, but she was miserable to work for. People hated her. She had a very low retention of employees because of her attitude and her abrasiveness. And remember, on the second day, her having, start crying. And nobody ever would have thought it would take a blue moon for this woman to ever cry. She never showed any emotion other than anger and tough, in this so-called shell of toughness. And she broke down and realized that her abandonment, emotional abandonment as a child from her mother, had led her to develop this false sense of toughness, that she put walls up against people. She had a hard time delegating, had a hard time communicating to others, demanded a lot from people, and pushed people the wrong way. That was a shift for her, and I ended up coaching her for 2.5 years, where she made a major shift in her attitude, her personality, and her communication style, to now where people felt comfortable around her for the first time. And this is a woman that never had a relationship with a man. Like, maybe she might be with somebody for a short period of time, and the guy would be running off because he couldn't stand her. And finally, to be able to have relationships with people, in this case, that had a hard time holding on to.
Definitely. So, what would you say is some of the Yeah, let's give the top 5 mistakes that people make when they're first starting out becoming speakers.
Well, the first mistake is that they just assume that if they put their profile on Speaker Hub or eSpeaker, or maybe perhaps you're lucky that you're you're recognized in your field and you join a speaker bureau, that those sources alone are going to get you booked. They're not. Not to say you still can't get booked by a speaker bureau, because that's what they're there for. But if you rely upon other sources like that to do that, ain't going to be the answer. The answer is understanding the secrets of how to get in front of event planners, meeting planners, board of advisors, board of directors, people in the industry that are looking for content that is going to help them solve challenges, problems, and create solutions. Knowing that process. And that's something I learned early on, and today teach that to other speakers, business owners, coaches, high performers, and how to go about doing that, getting paid to speak, and then now scaling your business profoundly as a result of it. Speaking to me is the best way to speak to one to many, to generate more business volume, sales for why and what you do, and creates just better rapport and better relationships with people right from the beginning moving forward.
Definitely, definitely. I think that's um, a huge thing. When you are trying to be a speaker or you're trying to get into podcasting, whatever, you can't just expect just to go on this side or that side. You have to network with people. Because I
Yeah,
got
you
into
got to build a
it,
network. You got to learn the process.
right?
And they just think a speaker reel and a speaker one sheet and putting your profile on Speaker Hub is going to all you need. I got my shingle out there. I'm just waiting for the calls to come in. I can probably count on half of my fingers how many calls you're going to get on average.
Exactly. It's about putting yourself out there
Yeah.
for real. Like I said, I love what you said when you talked about, getting in front of, the board of directors and meeting planners, event planners, because those are the ones that are going to be booking you, because those are the ones that have the check to do so. So,
Yes.
you know,
Exactly.
yeah, it's interesting too, because even when it comes to podcasting, people think, oh, I'm just gonna throw it on Spotify or whatever without any promotion, without even people knowing who you are. That's not how this works, sweetheart. You have to get to know people. Because even when I got into this, I originally got into it because my friend Katrina Lynn was doing her show. I started coming on there a couple times, and then I went to another friend's show when they had, like, I think it was Ustream or whatever. And she was like, "Have you ever thought about actually getting into radio for real?" And I was like, "No, not really." And then I hosted a show on a station called Jim Jim years ago. I was asked to host over there, and then I hosted another show with my friend Diva Ebony B. And then but the way I got into Next Legacy, I literally called in to support a friend, and the music was awesome and the energy was dope. And a couple weeks later, they're like, "We want you to become a part of the staff." And that was in 2012. And now, we've gone from Blog Talk, and now we have our own mobile application. But this, it wasn't like, oh, this happened overnight. This happened over time. This happened because I want to support someone else. I
Yeah.
think a lot of people forget that. They get so focused on, I'm just gonna do this and everything's gonna come to me automatically. That's not how this works. That's not how
No.
any of this works. It takes a lot of time and effort to be able to build relationships, especially when it comes to Clubhouse. For those of y'all who have not heard about the 413, that call is at 5:30 in the morning.
Yeah, 5:30 for you. And well, I'm up at 4 o'clock, so 6:37 my time's not so bad. I'm already, yeah, but 5:37 for you, and then the people on the West Coast, they're up at 3:37.
Three. Exactly. So that there takes time and dedication, but we have been able to watch people make some amazing changes. And that has been the best part for me, was literally watching people's transformation in the 413 for sure. So, with everything that you do, when everything is said and done, what do you want your legacy to be?
My legacy?
Yes.
I would say that my legacy is to let people know it's okay to be you. Be your better self. It's not about being the best, it's about being your better self than you were yesterday. How can you be the example and be a resource to help others do the same for themselves? It's about it's about learning to operate from a place of in the moment, from intentions, rather than from the past and the future with fear from expectations, free from limiting beliefs. And that when if we can learn to live from a place of giving without expectation, in this case from empathy and kindness, not pleasing and enabling others, to receive without resistance, meaning that when it comes back to you, as long as it serves you, you receive it without resistance and not breaking that cycle, your whole life can transform for the better. Your business can transform. It doesn't mean everything is going to go great, because without challenges, obstacles, setbacks, we can't grow and expand. If everything goes right all the time, you're going to become complacent, bored, and eventually you'll create a problem. So I find that that's the legacy I'm looking to create, a shift in our paradigm in terms of how we think in the moment rather than the future, tensions rather than expectations, give without expectation, receive without resistance, learn to control what you can, letting go of what you can't, look at situations for what it is, not what you think it should be, to maximize your results in it.
Absolutely. No question. So go ahead and tell everybody where they can find you, book you, all of that good stuff.
Absolutely. Well, I would say the best place that you can find me is right here. You see ChristopherSalem.com. I also have my business website at sustainablesuccess.net. You can reach out to me on LinkedIn at Christopher Salem. It's another great place. Or email chris@christophersalem.com.
Thank you so much again. It's always a pleasure to talk to you. We definitely have to do this another time for sure.
Oh, count on it. Absolutely. It is a pleasure, Denai, to be here and serve your audience.
Thank you so much.